What happens when a place designed to destroy human life becomes a laboratory for the most twisted experiments in history? You step off a cattle car after days without food or water. Your legs barely hold you up. Through smoke and chaos, you see a man in a pristine uniform standing calmly by the tracks. He's handsome, well-dressed, almost elegant. With a simple gesture, left or right, he decides your fate in seconds. The prisoners had a name for him, the Angel of Death, Dr. Josef Mengele. We all know Auschwitz was a place of unimaginable horror. But what if I told you that within its walls there was a section that even hardened SS guards avoided, and where the boundaries between medicine and torture completely disappeared? Mengele didn't just kill, he studied, he collected, he preserved, and the evidence of what he did was so disturbing that when Allied forces discovered his research, many of the documents were immediately classified. But there's something even more chilling about Mengele's story. Unlike other Nazi war criminals who were captured and tried, he escaped. For decades he lived freely while his victims' families searched for answers. Today we're uncovering the full truth about the Angel of Death. This isn't just about one man's crimes. It's about how evil can hide behind the mask of science, and why these darkest chapters of history must never be forgotten. But before we begin, I need to warn you, what you're about to hear will challenge everything you thought you knew about the limits of human cruelty. Josef Mengele was born on March 16, 1911, in the small Bavarian town of Günzburg in southern Germany. His family was well off compared to most of their neighbours. His father, Karl Mengele, owned a successful company that produced agricultural machinery such as threshers, saws and milling equipment. The business employed several workers, which meant the Mengeles had a stable income and a respected place in the community. His mother, Walburga, cared for the home and raised Joseph and his two younger brothers, Karl Jr. and Alois. Joseph grew up in an environment where discipline, order and ambition were valued, and he had the means to pursue higher education without worrying about financial hardship. As a child and young man, Mengele did well enough in school to earn his place among better students. He enjoyed art, music and physical activities like skiing, which was possible because of his family's proximity to the Alps. In 1930, he graduated from high school and began thinking about a professional career. At first he considered dentistry, but he soon decided it was too narrow a field. He chose to study medicine instead, with a strong interest in anthropology and genetics. This combination allowed him to work with both the scientific and human aspects of medicine, and it matched his desire to be seen as a serious researcher. In October 1930, Mengele moved to Munich to begin his studies. Munich at that time was not only a centre for education, but also a place of growing political unrest. The Nazi Party, led by Adolf Hitler, was gaining strength in the region. Public speeches, rallies and street marches were common, and the city was becoming a hub for nationalist politics. While Mengele focused on his education, the political climate was hard to ignore. In March 1931, before formally joining the Nazis, Mengele entered the Stahlhelm, a nationalist veterans organization. This group, while not as extreme as the Nazi Party, shared many conservative and nationalist values. By his own later account, he was already attracted to the Nazi platform, but he had not yet joined. Over the next few years, as Germany's economy suffered during the Great Depression and political tensions deepened, the Nazis became more popular. For many students of that era, their rise seemed like the only way to restore Germany's strength and pride. Through the early 1930s, Mengele continued his medical training, moving between institutions and building his academic credentials. In 1935, he earned a doctorate in anthropology from the University of Munich, with a thesis on racial morphological differences in the lower jaw among different groups. At this stage, his research used accepted scientific methods and did not yet show the extreme racial ideology he would later adopt. The turning point came in 1937, when he took a position as a research assistant at the Institute for Heredity, Biology and Racial Purity at the University of Frankfurt. There, Mengele worked under Professor Ottmar Freiherr van Verscher, one of Germany's leading experts in human genetics and a committed supporter of Nazi racial theories. Under von Hirscher's influence, Mengele's academic work became more directly connected to Nazi ideology. he began to participate in studies that examined physical traits to determine racial background, often in the context of enforcing the Nuremberg laws, which had stripped Jews of their rights. Immersed in this environment, Mengele's views shifted. In May 1937, he officially joined the Nazi Party. The following year, in 1938, he applied to and was accepted into the SS, the elite paramilitary organization that enforced many of the regime's policies, including those tied to the concentration camp system. Joining the SS meant committing himself not only to the Nazi state, but also to the more radical and violent aspects of its mission. By the late 1930s, Europe was moving toward war. Mengele's career was progressing quickly, and his political commitments gave him access to influential networks. When Germany invaded Poland in September 1939, he enlisted for military service. A pre-existing kidney problem delayed his deployment, but by 1940 he was serving as a medical officer in the Waffen-SS. His early assignments included work in occupied Poland, where he evaluated the racial suitability of individuals for resettlement programs, part of the Nazi plan to clear territory for ethnic Germans. In 1941, Mengele was sent to the Eastern Front during Operation Barbarossa, the German invasion of the Soviet Union. There, as part of the Waffen-SS Viking Division, he was kept mainly behind the front lines because of his medical skill. In one battle near Rostov in 1942, he reportedly pulled 2 wounded soldiers from a burning tank under enemy fire. For this, he received the Iron Cross First Class, a decoration for bravery, as well as other military awards. These honours raised his status within the SS and gave him a reputation as a dedicated and courageous officer. This combination of medical expertise, ideological loyalty, and military distinction made Mengele stand out to the regime and positioned him for the next step in his career. In May 1943, Josef Mengele arrived at Auschwitz-Birkenau, the largest and most infamous camp in the Nazi concentration camp system. He was appointed as a camp doctor in Birkenau and given the position of chief physician of the Romani family camp, a section of the camp where entire Roma families were kept together instead of being separated. From the beginning, his duties went far beyond normal medical work. One of his most visible roles was taking part in the selections on the train ramp. Trains carrying thousands of prisoners from across Nazi-occupied Europe arrived almost daily. Men, women, and children, exhausted from the journey, were forced to line up as SS doctors like Mengele inspected them. The process was quick, but deadly in its consequences. Prisoners were judged in a matter of seconds based mainly on their physical condition. Those considered fit enough for forced labour were sent to one side. The rest, often the elderly, the sick, pregnant women, and most children, were sent directly to the gas chamber. They were usually dead within hours of arriving. Survivors later recalled Mengele's calm, almost polite manner during these selections. He was always neatly dressed, often wearing a spotless uniform and gloves. Unlike some doctors who disliked the task, Mengele seemed willing, even eager to take part. He sometimes appeared at the ramp on days when he was not scheduled, as if the process itself interested him. To many who saw him, this combination of composure and lethal decision-making was deeply unsettling. Soon after his arrival, Mengele faced his first outbreak of a disease called noma in the Romani camp. Noma is a severe gangrenous infection that destroys the mouth and face, usually affecting malnourished children. Instead of focusing on treatment, Mengele saw the outbreak as a chance to study the illness. Infected prisoners, especially children, were isolated, examined, and in some cases killed, so their heads and organs could be sent to a medical institute in Austria for further research. Typhus was another constant threat in the camp, spreading quickly in overcrowded and unsanitary barracks. Mengele's method for stopping such outbreaks was brutally simple. When typhus appeared in a barracks, he ordered everyone inside, sometimes hundreds of women, to be sent to the gas chamber. The building would then be disinfected and new prisoners brought in. This approach eliminated the disease in that location, but at the cost of mass murder. These early actions at Auschwitz showed how Mengele combined his authority as a doctor with the ruthless logic of the camp system. They also hinted at a darker interest he would soon pursue, one that went far beyond even these deadly selections and disease controls into experiments that would become infamous around the world. Behind Josef Mengele's work in Auschwitz was an idea that had been growing inside Nazi ideology for years. The regime dreamed of creating what they called a racially pure society. In their view, this meant controlling who could have children and shaping the future population through selective breeding. Genetics became a key tool in this plan. If they could fully understand how traits were inherited, they believed they could strengthen what they considered the Aryan race and remove traits they saw as undesirable. Twins offered Mengele a unique opportunity for this. In science, twins are valuable because they allow researchers to compare the role of heredity within the role of environment. If identical twins shown the same traits when exposed to different conditions, it could be seen as proof that those traits were inherited. For Mengele, twins in Auschwitz were not children with lives and families, they were test material, living subjects who could be used, compared, and discarded once the results were collected. When trains arrived at the camp, Mengele personally searched for twins. Sometimes he would step away from his usual duties at the selection ramp just to pick them out. They could be any age: infants, children, teenagers, even elderly pairs. Those chosen were separated from other prisoners and sent to special barracks. Compared to the rest of the camp, these twins often received better food, were allowed to keep their hair, and wore their own clothes. These were not acts of kindness, it was to keep them alive and in good condition for experiments. The research began with detailed record keeping. Mengele and his team took regular measurements of height, arm span, chest size, and the shape of facial features. Photographs were taken from multiple angles. Samples of blood, saliva, and even tissue were collected. The process could take hours and was repeated every few days or weeks. Some survivors recalled being measured so often that they felt more like objects than people. As the studies went on, the procedures became more invasive. Mengele ordered blood transfusions between twins to see how their bodies would react. In some cases, one twin would be injected with a disease such as typhus or tuberculosis, and the other would be monitored to check if the illness could spread between them or if they would react in the same way. Many of these experiments caused extreme pain, illness, and lasting injury. One of Mengele's more disturbing obsessions was with eye colour. He was especially interested in heterochromia, a condition where a person's eyes are different colours. Hoping to find a way to change eye colour, he injected chemicals directly into the eyes of living subjects, often children. The injections were painful and could cause severe infections, swelling, or blindness. Once the subject died, whether from the procedure or by later execution, their eyes were sometimes removed and sent to research institutes in Germany. When Mengele believed he had learned everything possible from a pair of twins, the final step was often death. He would order them killed, commonly with an injection of chloroform to the heart, so that their bodies could be dissected. Comparing the internal organs of both twins, he hoped to confirm his theories about heredity. Survivor accounts describe how pairs who had been alive and talking one day could be gone the next, their absence explained only by the sight of their empty beds. His experiments were not limited to twins. Roma prisoners, people with physical deformities, and those with rare medical conditions were targeted. He examined individuals with dwarfism, measuring their limbs, studying their bone structure, and taking blood samples. Pregnant women were also used in experiments, sometimes infected with diseases like typhus, to see if the illness could pass to their unborn children. Newborns were not spared. In some cases, babies were killed so that their bodies could be studied for evidence of inherited conditions. These so-called studies were presented by Mengele as scientific work, but they had no real medical value. They were driven by ideology, cruelty, and the false belief that human worth could be measured, altered, or erased through selective breeding and controlled genetics. In the controlled world of Auschwitz, Mengele had all the subjects he wanted and no limits on what he could do to them. The results were not measured in discoveries, but in the lives destroyed. Many survivors of Auschwitz remembered Josef Mengele not only for the experiments he carried out, but for the unsettling way he could act toward the prisoners in between them. Some described him as polite and even warm in certain moments. He might stop to ask a child how they were feeling, or hand out candy to a group of young twins. A few recalled him smiling, speaking gently, or making casual conversation about their health. But this surface of kindness was thin and deceptive. The same people who received a sweet word or a small gift from him could find themselves sent to the gas chamber hours later, chosen by Mengele himself during a selection. He carried out these decisions without hesitation, and without a trace of regret. The contrast between charm and cruelty made him particularly dangerous. Mengele presented himself as a refined man. He dressed in a spotless, perfectly fitted uniform, his boots polished to a shine. His dark hair was neatly combed, and he carried himself with confidence. He was known to walk through the camp with a violin in hand, sometimes playing pieces of classical music. To an outsider, his manner might have suggested education and culture. Inside the camp, however, those outward signs of refinement stood in shocking opposition to his actions in the laboratory and on the selection ramp. In his workspace, Mengele's behavior changed completely. Their prisoners were not people to him. They were subjects, numbers, and sources of information for his research. He could spend hours measuring a child's head or recording the color of their eyes, and then decide that the child should be killed so an autopsy could be done. There was no pause, no sign of conflict in his expression. Those who worked under him noticed that he treated the process as routine, moving from one subject to the next with the same calm he showed when speaking to colleagues. The ability to switch between a pleasant social manner and acts of extreme violence shows something deeply disturbing about his mindset. Mengele did not see his behavior as wrong. He believed that his work served a higher purpose, one defined by Nazi ideology and framed as scientific progress. In this view, the suffering or death of prisoners was not a moral issue at all, but simply part of the process. He had fully accepted the idea that the goals of racial science justified any method, no matter how cruel. This conviction allowed him to work in Auschwitz without doubt, regret, or hesitation, playing the role of cultured gentleman in one moment and pitiless executioner in the next. You are probably wondering what happened to one of the most notorious war criminals in history, and how one of the darkest secrets of the post-war was finally uncovered. In January 1945, as Soviet forces advanced towards Auschwitz, the SS began evacuating the camp. Josef Mengele left before the Red Army arrived, taking with him samples from his experiments and pages of notes. His goal was to protect the material he believed was valuable for future research, even as the camp was being dismantled. From Auschwitz, he moved to the Gross-Rosen concentration camp in Lower Silesia, and then fled again as Soviet troops closed in. In the chaotic months after Germany's collapse, Mengele tried to blend in with regular soldiers. In June 1945, he was captured by American forces in Germany. At that time, Allied lists of wanted war criminals had already included his name. But when American officers processed him, they failed to realize who he was. One crucial detail worked in his favor. Unlike most SS members, Mengele did not have the blood-type tattoo that identified him. Without it, and with no immediate proof of his identity, the Americans released him after 2 months in custody. For the next several years, Mengele lived under false names in Germany. He stayed on farms, worked manual jobs, and avoided crowded places. By 1949, the risk of recognition was growing, and he decided to leave Europe entirely. Using the Rat Line, a network that smuggled Nazi fugitives out of Europe, Mengele traveled to Italy. In Genoa, he obtained a Red Cross passport under the name Helmut Gregor. Later that year, he boarded a ship to Argentina, a country that under President Juan Perón welcomed many former Nazis. In Buenos Aires, Mengele lived under his false identity and began to rebuild his life. He worked as a salesman for farming equipment and later invested in small businesses. Over time, he moved more freely, eventually using his real name in social circles that included Nazi sympathizers. In 1954, his wife Irene divorced him, unwilling to join him in exile. 4 years later, he married his widowed sister-in-law, Marta, who joined him in South America. Argentina was not the only country where he found safety. In early 1960s, when international pressure on Nazi fugitives increased, Mengele moved between Argentina, Paraguay, and Brazil. He relied on a network of former Nazis, German expatriates, and sympathetic locals for shelter, money, and false documents. He came dangerously close to being caught more than once. In 1960, the Israeli intelligence agency Mossad launched a secret operation in Buenos Aires to capture Adolf Eichmann, one of the main organizers of the Holocaust. They had information suggesting Mengele might also be nearby. In fact, for a time he was in Argentina, but by the time Mossad agents moved, he had already slipped into Paraguay and then Brazil. The opportunity to capture him was lost. Throughout the 1960s and 70s, Nazi hunters such as Simon Wiesenthal tracked rumors of Mengele's whereabouts, yet he continued to evade capture, moving between remote farms and small towns. His health began to decline in the mid-1970s. In 1976, he suffered a stroke but remained in hiding in Brazil under the protection of close allies. On February 7, 1979, while swimming off the coast near Bertioga, Brazil, Mengele had another stroke and drowned. His death went unreported to the world. Those protecting him buried in a cemetery outside Sao Paulo under the name Wolfgang Gerhard, the identity of a man who had sheltered him years earlier. For 6 more years, the world believed he might still be alive. Then, in 1985, West German authorities found a cache of letters and documents in his hometown of Günzburg. The evidence led to the grave in Brazil. The remains were exhumed, and forensic experts, including an American team, confirmed they belonged to Josef Mengele. His son Rolf later verified the identification. Mengele had died without facing trial or punishment for the crimes he committed at Auschwitz. His story became one of the most disturbing examples of how some of the worst offenders of the Holocaust escaped justice for decades. So in the end, even though Mengele claimed he wanted to unlock the secrets of life, nothing can justify the horrors he committed. His so-called science left behind only death, pain, and stolen childhoods. What do you think about all this? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories from history's darkest chapters.